sure what that beeping noise was. Okay, wasn't me. Good morning. It's now 9:30 and time to open the hearing session for matter 2. Can I just check everyone can hear me okay? Okay. My name is Kevin Ward and my colleague on my left is Kelly Ford. We're the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State under Section 20 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act to carry out the independent examination of the Solihull local plan. The programme officer for the examination is Kelly Akins, on my right. She's responsible for the administration of the examination and the hearings and is acting as the channel of communication between ourselves, the council and other participants. Anyone with any general queries about the examination should contact Kelly in the first instance. She'll be available here today in the building and for subsequent hearing sessions. And her contact details are on the guidance notes previously circulated. Can I just ask everyone in the room to make sure mobile phones and any other devices you have are on silent? I understand there is one participant who needs access to phone for other reasons, so that's fine. Yeah. We're not expecting a fire alarm test today, so if the alarm sounds, we treat it seriously and leave promptly, please. The fire exit signs will be escorted to safety by the staff in the building. The guidance notes that we issued earlier in the year set out the background to the examination and the hearings, and all of the documents relevant to the examination are available on the council's examination page on the website. Documents will be added as we go through, as usual, so I would advise people to keep a check on that and see for any updates. All of the sessions are being streamed live on the council's YouTube channel and recorded, so you can watch it back at your leisure later on. So this applies to the in-person sessions here and also the virtual sessions that we'll be having later on. And again, there's a link from the council's examination page of the website to that. Today's session concerns matter 2, which relates to the duty to cooperate. An agenda has been circulated, so hopefully everyone has a copy. We'll be working through that agenda in order. So if you can please make sure you wait until the appropriate point on the agenda to speak in relation to your representations. Once we've dealt with a particular item, we'll be moving on. So we won't be returning to it. So please make sure you cover all the points that you want to at the appropriate time. If I can ask everyone to be as focused and succinct as possible, please. Please avoid simply agreeing with others who've spoken or repeating points that have already been made. We do have a lot to get through and a significant number of participants here today wishing to speak, and we need to make best use of time. Just to emphasise that we do have obviously all of the representations made on the local plan and all of the additional statements which have been submitted in relation to our matters, issues and questions document. And we will of course be taking all of those into account. In terms of the format of the hearing, we'll usually be directing questions in the first instance at least to the council. But we will give other participants full opportunity to speak in relation to their representations at the appropriate point in time. We are likely to ask the council perhaps to respond to points before we move on to others. Please only speak when you're asked to do so. Only one participant speaking at a time. And when you do wish to speak, if you can switch your microphone on by pressing the button at the bottom of the box in front of you, and make sure you switch that off when you finish speaking. If you do wish to speak at any point, if you can place your nameplate on its end in front of you, and that will indicate to us that you want to come into the discussion. Please bear with us. Again, we've got a number of people in the room today, and we'll try our best to bring people in the right order as much as possible. We have a full day set aside today to deal with the duty to cooperate. We may or may not need a full day. We'll see how we get on, but we do have that facility if necessary. We'll take breaks, so probably realistically we'll take a break mid-morning. We'll take a lunch break, and if we're into the afternoon, we'll take an afternoon break. We don't have facilities for hot drinks, I'm afraid, at the moment. So as we did yesterday, we'll take perhaps an extended break time of about half an hour, which should give people a chance to pop out and come back again in time. If everyone can make sure that you do come back in time for the resumption of the session after any breaks. Before we move on to the agenda, are there any queries in relation to the hearings or the format of proceedings today? Mr. Kimblin, yeah.
So good morning, Adam, good morning. Richard Kimblin, Queen's Counsel, Summix. So just one short point arising from yesterday, I thought appropriate just to raise at the outset. You'll recall that it was submitted on behalf of the Council that the burden is upon objectors to show that the plan is not sound. It's the presumption point that was mentioned yesterday. But I imagine that the point was not missed by you, but I just want to make completely plain in the event that the Council is proceeding on that basis that we disagree with that proposition. And for that reason, we've provided to the Programme Officer a copy of the Capel Parish Council case, which is very clear that there is no such presumption. And that's the basis on which we shall be proceeding.
Okay, any points? Yes, the gentleman at the front there. Sorry, I forgot to say, I'm not going to do introductions in the room, so the first time that people speak, if they could just introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Robert Walton, QC, here for Roscon today. Just a point that you mentioned right at the end of the proceedings yesterday, that you would be liaising with the Council about action points and the like, and it's just about the visibility of that communication as to whether there will be notes sent to the Council or conversations had, and how we will see those. Will they be on the website? And if so, when?
Good question. It wasn't the intention to. I mean, as we would normally do with examinations, I suppose there are working documents passing between ourselves and the Council. In terms of the actual result of those action points in terms of documents, yes, the plan will be, as they're fed through, they'll be placed on the examination website. So if the action does result in a document or a note being produced, they'll be added as we go through. Yesterday was the first day, obviously, so I think we're still getting used to the mechanics as to exactly how it work. But yeah, the intention is, I mean, typically, as you know, some things can be produced very quickly, some things take time, so they'll be added as and when they're available. But yes, the intention would be to create a running list of documents that's been produced. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Just while we're on such matters, etc., one thing that we didn't raise yesterday, which perhaps we should have sorted out then, was, I suppose, the principle of the Council's approach towards main modifications. Unless I've missed it, we don't appear to have a formal request from the Council to recommend main modifications. I'm assuming that would be the Council's position, but it would be helpful if that can be provided to us in writing, just in form of a short letter, really, if that's possible.
That certainly is the Council's intention, sir.
Thank you. Any other points before we move on to the agenda itself? Okay, thank you.
So today we're considering the duty to cooperate, and in preparing local plans, councils have a duty to cooperate with other local authorities, county councils and other prescribed. Sorry. So I'll start again. In preparing local plans, councils have a duty to cooperate with other authorities, county councils and prescribed bodies on strategic cost boundary issues. This should be done constructively, actively and on an ongoing basis, and councils are expected to demonstrate evidence of having effectively cooperated to plan for the issues that have cross-boundary impacts. You'll see from point 1 of the agenda that it's broken down into 3 parts. And to make sure that we cover everything, I think it's going to be important that we stick to those rather than jumping about. And just to say, what I plan to do is to ask the council the questions first relating to the bullet points and each of those subheadings before inviting others to contribute. So if you put your nameplates up, please don't think that I'm ignoring you. It's just that we just get the council's perspective on those points first. So considering first the unmet need from Birmingham up to 2031, can the council explain what you consider the current position to be, please?
Thank you, Ma'am. I think at the outset, I'd like to state that I think many of those that have made representations on this matter have either explicitly or implicitly stated there is no shortcoming with a legal duty to cooperate, and that any difference between us is a matter of soundness, and that goes for all the other planning authorities in the housing market area. With that as a sort of context, looking at unmet need from Birmingham to 2031, the council recognises this is a particularly complex geography with plans at different stages, and that latter point is especially important as planning is really quite dynamic in this respect. Position statement 3, which is document reference 209, is an outcome of the council engaging constructively, actively and ongoing with other local planning authorities in the HMA area. And it's the collective view of the authorities in the housing market area that PS3, position statement 3, represents the most up-to-date HMA-wide position agreed by the local planning authorities that seeks to deal with the unmet need created by the adopted Birmingham Development Plan. No other agreed position statement exists. In Table 5 of Document 209, it shows there is a remaining shortfall of 2,597 dwellings that hasn't yet been dealt with. But because the base date of the position statement is the 1st of April 2019, that does not yet account for plans emerging from South Staffordshire, Lichfield and Cannock, which have been published since the base date, and that's referred to in paragraph 6.3. When these are factored in, it is the view of the HMA authorities, or it is the council's view that when these are factored in, the shortfall effectively falls away, and that's at the State Council's hearing statement at paragraph 26. We are effectively seeking to bring an end to this chapter before moving on to the next. Essentially, what the council and the HMA authorities are doing is looking to use the position statement as a way of monitoring the change in planning supply plans coming on stream since the Birmingham plan was adopted, and so that's why it links heavily to the adopted position of the Birmingham Development Plan, and it's a way of looking to try and draw an end to that chapter in plan making before the next chapter opens, and that is with the progression of the Black Country Plan and the update of the Birmingham Plan, which in the sort of council's view would be another chapter in plan making. And we don't think the cause would be served by stopping, going back a number of steps and restarting within this chapter, if I could call it that. What the Solihull plan is seeking to do now is have a pragmatic approach that is seeking to boost supply now, accommodate Solihull's own needs and make a meaningful contribution to the HMA, and recognise that although there's been a pause at the time the Solihull local plan was submitted in terms of the duty to cooperate. The duty to cooperate doesn't finish there. In the context of the council engaging with other plan making authorities, and we would continue to engage with them as their plans are brought forward, and as we move into the next chapter of plan making, if we could call it that.
Thank you. Could you explain a bit more about how you actually worked with neighbouring authorities to address the unmet need from Birmingham?
There has been a fairly long-standing history of cooperation between plan-making authorities, but the present round of discussions effectively stemmed from the creation of a housing market area technical officers group, which is essentially officers from the authorities within the 14 authorities that are in the housing market area meet on a regular basis to consider how they should work together to address things like the sort of Birmingham shortfall and other matters. And it's principally through that route, as I say, that as a group was created after the Birmingham plan essentially set what an appropriate geography would be for the housing market area. Before that date, there was clearly cooperation between authorities as other plans were drawn on. So it wasn't. It sort of evolved into the technical officers group from that point onwards, and running in sort of parallel to that, there are other groups that the sort of council engaged with and was part of, including West Midlands Authority Plan Officers Group, part of the Greater Birmingham Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership Planning Group, etc. So there are other bodies, but the main focus of the working for the position statement was through the Technical Officers Group.
Yeah, in the absence of an agreed methodology, what approach has been taken to determine how much each authority should take?
That's, as you say, it's in the absence of an agreed methodology. So it has been for each local authority to essentially determine what they believe would be an appropriate contribution and how that would sort of come forward, and that has resulted in a number of authorities making sort of contributions in their area. From Solihull's perspective, the potential to make the contribution of 2,000 was set out in the draft local plan of November 2016. At that point, we had started work. Sorry, if I go one step back, the adopted plan of 2013 did have a legal challenge to it, which, along with a couple of other triggers, did mean that we started work on a review of the plan sooner than might have otherwise done. And so using the evidence base that we got from the 2013 plan that was then being updated to support the local plan review, for instance, Greenbelt assessment, SHLA, etc., there was quite a large body of evidence that we had to inform options, including the interim sustainability appraisal. And it was through that sort of process that the sort of contribution of 2,000 was included on the plan. So it was from having a sort of good understanding of the evidence base that we got at the time, and that was set in the sort of context of the emerging work through the technical officers group in terms of taking those matters forward.
Does anybody around the room want to raise any comments in terms of what the unmet need from Birmingham is up to 2031? So at the back, sorry, can't.
Thank you. My name's David Carter from Tyler Parks, and I am here representing the interests of a number of landowners across the borough, and they're listed on the sort of the agenda for today. I just wanted to make a couple of general points, if I may, which were, when you look at the questions, 1A talks about unmet need from Birmingham, and then the first bullet point talks about Birmingham and the Black Country housing market area. And it seems to me that that sort of almost highlights the difficulty in here, in a sense that the issue started with the shortfall from Birmingham, but it's become much wider than that. So are we talking about Birmingham, or are we talking about the wider housing market area? And then it becomes more complicated. I mean, we often talk about sort of apples and oranges complicating matters, but I think that different methodologies, timescales, and so on, it's apples, oranges, and pears. In this case, it's very, very complicated. I think that some of the changes that have taken place, like the additional capacity that's come forward in Birmingham and assumptions such as the increasing densities, they have significantly eaten into the shortfall, but those things haven't been tested, as far as I'm aware, through any examination process. I think that Solihull are right in what they're saying, in the sense that there has been evidence of extensive continuing engagement between the authorities. And PS3, the third report, is definitely, sort of a concrete outcome of that process, but it doesn't resolve the issue. It's a monitoring report, in effect. So that means that sort of almost 7 years since the shortfall in Birmingham was initially identified, there still isn't a sort of a mechanism for dealing with the issue, other than going to a public examination into a local plan such as this, where I think the only way forward is for a judgment to be made about what needs to happen. Is the provision in the plan sufficient, or is the outstanding shortfall, which Solihull referred to as 2597, is that really the position? My reading of the various documentation and the evidence that other parties have put in is that it looks like the shortfall is actually substantially higher than that, not only in the period up to 2031, but beyond as well. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any issues to raise on that?
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. My name is Killian Garvey. I'm a barrister. I act for 5 parties who are on my name tag, so I won't read them all out for the sake of brevity. It simply was going to make a point of context. Ma'am, the question you've asked is about whether there's any comments about unmet need up to 2031. There's an obvious overlap here between matter 2 and matter 3, and just to set out the position that we're advancing, we don't say that the council have failed insofar as their duty to cooperate is concerned. So we weren't going to make any arguments today on unmet need. We were going to save those for matter 3, because we say that they are points that go to soundness, but not to duty to cooperate. And of course, that's a critical distinction, because one of those, soundness, can be resolved through main modifications, duty to cooperate can't. So it's simply just by way of context that the question you've asked, in the context of duty to cooperate, we're not going to make any points today, but we will come to address it if you're content on the next session for matter 3.
Just if I can come in there, just coming back to the council, the position statement 3, it's dated, I think, July 2020. Are there plans to have a further update of that situation?
Yes, there is an update being prepared to effectively keep the methodology in the position statement 3 similar, but update it with supply figures as of 1st of April 2020. So whereas position statement 3 has a date of 1st of April 2019, the HMA authorities are working on an update to have that updated to 1st of April 2020.
Do you have a timescale for that being produced?
It's imminent. We have actually got a meeting scheduled for the week after next, and at that meeting, I hope to be able to provide what would be a reasonable time period for it to be provided.
If we move on then to considering the Black Country authorities, what do you consider the unmet need will be from the Black Country up to 2031 and then beyond 2031?
I think there was a Toblerone over here.
Sorry, it's quite difficult to see from the angle I'm saying.
No. Thank you very much, ma'am, sir. Just to confirm, I'm Tom Armfield from Turley, representing IM Land. I might be listed as Angela Reeve today, so just to clear that. Just two very brief points on the council's case just there. And I don't want to go into too much detail because it might be for the next question or for next week. But the council referred to the shortfall in planning as being a dynamic matter. But then when it listed the contributions being made to the shortfall that could be counted towards it, they listed Lichfield, Cannock Chase, and South Staffordshire, and they listed those because of the progress that the plan was making. But if you can include those plans as dealing with the current shortfall, the Birmingham shortfall, then really you should be including the shortfall from the Black Country as well in your calculations, because the Black Country's plan is exactly the same position as South Staff's. They're at a Reg 18 consultation at the moment with preferred options. So in terms of plan progress, if you're including South Staff's contribution to the shortfall, then surely you must have to include the Black Country shortfall, which I appreciate from the question you just asked, ma'am, is where we're perhaps going next. So I won't say much more on that. The only other point I was going to make was the council referred to the shortfall now being wrapped up in terms of the contributions from those three authorities that I've already mentioned. But if you look at the Black Country hearing statement to this matter and to the next one, they provide a summary of the contributions being made, and they also provide commentary as to what shortfall they think they're going to. If you take the council's case as they've presented it, just the Birmingham shortfall, then Black Country say only 665 dwellings from Lichfield is going to the Birmingham shortfall. And on the South Staffordshire contribution to the shortfall, it says that the majority will go to Birmingham. Taking those numbers together, it wouldn't add up to 2,597. But I think this probably goes to a wider point that perhaps the Birmingham shortfall shouldn't be dealt with in isolation. It's a wider matter. It's to do with the whole of the HMA. So rather than just looking at the Birmingham shortfall and calling it that, the chapter we're at the moment, and the Black Country being the next chapter, if planning's dynamic, it should all be looked at in the round now. Thank you very much.
Did you want to respond to that particular point?
I think what we've tried to do with our HMA partners is to break it down into manageable chunks, really, in terms of our approach to plan making. And if authorities were to stop and restart again at each time some changes would occur, I think that would make it very difficult to progress plans. As I said at the start, we recognise it's a complex geography. the complexity of which is amplified through the different plan periods authorities have got, and in trying to take it one step at a time, we recognise that others will have a sort of view on that. But what we believe it's an appropriate strategy to deal with taking it in those steps, and recognise that it's not the end of the situation for Solihull, since the next review that we'll have to engage with is as other plans come along, and any further unmet need from those plans becomes crystallised.
Okay, then, so just going back to the question about the Black Country, could you just start by explaining what you consider the unmet need to be up to 2031 and then after 2031 for the Black Country, please?
As yet, there isn't an HMA-wide position on what that would mean. I referred to a previous in a previous answer that the position statement is being updated to reflect the a base date of 1st of April 2020. But what the HMA authorities believe is the next step after that is to produce another version of the position statement that does start to look at drawing in local housing need and what that means for authorities that have started to progress their plans on that basis, principally the Black Country, and it's well known from the figures they've produced in their plan, etc., that they believe there is a shortfall that they will be asking or have asked authorities in the HMA to assist with, and potentially some beyond the HMA. But that is still an emerging plan. It's still untested, and that's not been sort of in the council view properly quantified yet for us to take into account in this plan making round. But we recognise it's one that is part of future ongoing discussions as part of the duty to cooperate.
So does that position also apply to Birmingham post 2031 as well then?
Indeed it does, and I'm aware from a July Cabinet report, July 2021 Cabinet report to Birmingham, that they have set out in a revised local development scheme a timetable for updating their plan, and so the position at the moment is that we don't believe that need has been quantified in sufficient detail for us to take into account at this stage of our plan making, but it's one that we recognise will need to be addressed in a review of the plan.
So has there been any, as part of this a group of 14 authorities, what discussions are taking place, if any, at the moment about what is likely to happen in the future?
I think the first part of that is really to look at coming up with a next version of the position statement other than the update to the supply of April 2020, having an update to the position statement that does start to take into account Black Country and how the local housing, the standard methodology plays out into that, and what they believe their position to be. As we'd say, that would be untested at this stage because of the stage they've made in plan making.
Do you have any idea when the scale of the unmet future need is likely to be known?
In terms of that being in an agreed HMA-wide position statement, I haven't got a date of when that is expected to emerge. whether after the next meeting there's a clearer timetable on that. If there is, I'd be happy to share that.
So am I right in thinking then that there are plans to discuss these things, but they haven't actually started yet?
Yes, the focus to date has been on, as I say, trying to draw an end to the chapter created by the adopted Birmingham plan, and then to move on in terms of what that new chapter would be in terms of local housing need and how that comes from the Black Country Plan, and how Birmingham will set that out in their new plan.
What do you consider the implications to be of having your plan run to 2036?
It's with our plan to 2036, we're looking to accommodate Solihull's own need that will be generated in that time, but recognised towards the end of the sort of plan period, it hasn't accommodated any further contribution that may be made to unmet need from others, and through the statutory requirement to review a plan every 5 years, we expect that to feature as part of that consideration as to when a review of this plan would be necessary.
Thank you. Just want to come back, and I've noticed Mr. Kimblin was wanting to speak. I don't know whether it was on the previous item or where we are now, but Mr. Kimblin, yeah.
So thank you very much. It can stitch them together. The phrase current chapter is becoming current, and I just wanted to deal with that in the context of what we're told about is happening the week after next, just the week after we deal with matter 3. We get a new arrival, PS4. PS4 to many would be something that would be exciting and fun, but position statement 4 may not be. Nevertheless, it's important in the context of the discussion of the cooperation which has taken place between HMA authorities. And I want to, first of all, if I may, just flag the potential need to accommodate further material which may emerge from that. It's very helpful to know that meeting is taking place just the week after matter 3 is discussed. It's fairly crucial to that. So that might be something that the examination may or may not need to come back to. But the more substantive point is this, that, of course, in getting to this review, it's taken some years. And the point at which we're at now is one where we have the emerging plans in adjacent authorities, the importance of the standard method and the testing of the shortfall being a prominent matter. All of those things wrap up to a really crucial point in the emergence of this particular plan, because we are now at the point where we need to know what the shortfall is, both in Birmingham, and the additional important question as to whether or not the HMA, whether or not we should be including the Black Country authorities as well. And when those two things are taken together, what the evidence which you have for this session says is that there is a very wide divergence of views and evidence as to what that shortfall is. And so that then leads to the question on the duty to cooperate. Cooperating to address what? Cooperating to address what? And so to a degree, we're asking this question the wrong way around. Because if you decide and indicate that you think that what is to be met is rather higher than the council has been working on, then that means that the duty to cooperate is dealing with something really quite different. And that is really a very substantial point, which can't really be resolved until we've had the exploration of matter 3. And so that, in coming back to PS4, that reinforces my first point. It may be something to which we need to return, having had the benefit of that further cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Just if I can come back to the council on a particular point, the plan period up to 2036, as we've been discussing, the council's position really is that the only thing that there is any certainty of is Birmingham's unmet needs up to 2031. We fully appreciate the council's position in terms of the wider HMA and indeed any time after 2031. But we have a plan period here up to 2036. So some would argue, perhaps logically, that the contribution that this Solihull local plan is making should be prorated, because the contribution of just over 2,000 dwellings could be argued should be spread evenly over the whole plan period, and therefore the contribution up to 2031 should be, that estimate should be reduced proportionately. Just wondered the council's particular response to that thought, really.
Thank you, sir. One thing that we haven't done in the Solihull plan and didn't believe it was necessary was to identify which sites may be coming forward in the plan and try and apportion those to where that need arises, whether it would be from within Solihull itself or whether it would be towards needs that arise elsewhere, either Birmingham or further down the line, Black Country. So we haven't sought to identify sites and to apportion them, as it were, to Solihull's needs or Birmingham's needs, and didn't think that was appropriate because of the geography of the borough and where sites sit, and because we are within the HMA as a whole, not looking to export beyond the HMA. So in the absence of having any sites that are identified in that respect, we haven't sought to suggest when within the trajectory the 2,000 contribution would be made, and we recognise that it is a view that could be prorated, but we haven't got evidence to say that, for instance, the first few years of the plan would produce the 2,000 dwellings that would go to the HMA shortfall.
You recognise that that's a view, but what's the council's view in terms of that? From what you say, we appreciate the point you make about you haven't specified which particular sites, which particular elements of supply would be, I suppose, apportioned towards unmet need. On that basis, there's a kind of a level playing field, I would imagine. And so is it not a reasonable proposition to say that the contribution of just over 2,000 dwellings should be spread across the whole of the plan period? Therefore, the contribution up to 2031 should be reduced proportionately. There's nothing in what you've just said to suggest anything else, I think, is what I'm saying.
And I think that would be our position, that there isn't any evidence to suggest an alternative approach. So that would appear to be a reasonable position.
So in terms of what this local plan, the Solihull local plan, is contributing towards unmet needs, is it reasonable then to reduce that estimate down from 2,105 to, I can't work out the figure off the top of my head, but it would be proportionately less than that?
I'm not sure if I've done the maths anywhere to do that, but I think that would be a reasonable position.
And I suppose that one of the key consequences of that is that position statement 3 would need to be updated to reflect that, because it's based on the premise that Solihull is contributing 2,000-ish houses towards the unmet need. It would be a bit less than that.
Yeah, it would be, but then as position statement 3 gets updated, then if the same approach were taken with other local authorities that are bringing forward plans that have an overlapping time period, that a pro rata approach is taken to those plans.
And I suppose it comes back to the fundamental point that, as far as Solihull's council is concerned, and indeed other authorities, you're not working to a set figure, you're not working to an agreed methodology about distribution, and your council's position is that the contribution is the contribution. It's because that's all that you can contribute. There is no set figure you're working to. So I suppose in that sense, reducing the estimated contribution has no effect, because you're not able, in your view, you're not able to contribute anymore anyway.
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Austin-Fell. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, ma'am, and thank you for also getting my name right. Most don't. Cameron Austin-Fell from Red Row Homes today. A brief point whilst we are hanging on the matter of the Black Country, and I'll just turn again to Mr. Palmer's comments, and I do have sympathy with Mr. Palmer and the council in understanding that they have a particularly challenging task on their hands in a very complex geography. But despite the complexity of the geography, does that mean that they should absolve themselves from grasping the nettle? In my view, it doesn't. In respect of the Black Country, the position has been clear for some time that the collection of authorities are going to be unable to meet their needs within their boundaries. This is evidenced as such within the 2017 Issues and Options Plan, where a shortfall figure was identified. Latterly, the council have prepared a draft plan, which I believe is still out for consultation, which again reiterates the point of a shortfall being present. And I think it's difficult, I think, to talk on this matter without straying into matter 3. And I understand the tentative views of the room about going into that now. But the point I perhaps would make, sir, is that both Solihull and the Black Country are using a standard methodology which is applicable to both authority areas. What we're not talking about here is the old system of objectively assessed need, where you have variations in annual requirements. You're looking at a standard method, a local housing need, which can be applied on a pro rata basis. So there is, sir and ma'am, there is a strong degree of certainty that a methodology can be adopted which will allow Solihull to account for some of the outstanding need from the Black Country if it is considered that that need can be met without leading to significant adverse impacts. A point no doubt we will come back to. As expressed by others in the room, sir, I'm a little reluctant to get into the brass taxes of the numbers, because I think that's perhaps better left for matter 3 next week. What we can say with some certainty, though, is, however, that the Black Country themselves have confirmed what their shortfall is. This, I expect, will come out in the aptly titled PS4 in the next couple of weeks. And I think we're all eagerly going to await for that material to be published. But if I am, sir, just to quickly alight on some of those numbers for your benefit, what is evidenced in the latest Black Country plan, that whilst they have a need of 76,076 over their plan period 2020 to 2039, they only have supply of 47,837. So we do have a shortfall here of just shy of 29,000 dwellings. So whether or not Solihull decide on the exact figure that is to be derived from the Black Country, what is quite clear is that this is quite a significant figure. I don't expect that notable changes in supply, which may be aggregated and will be tested through examination, will diminish the fact that the Black Country shortfall will need to be met from a number of sources and a number of neighbouring authorities. And that, sir, I think is important for us to understand in the context of this plan, not for a later plan, 5 years, 7 years, perhaps whenever it might be down the line. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Mr. Cannock.
Thank you, Ma'am. I'm not sure if I sense people sort of slightly running out of steam, but I wanted to try and draw some threads together from the council's perspective, if I may, and pick up perhaps the relationship between matter 2 and matter 3 and some of these points that have been made perhaps by Mr. Kimblin about what progress we can make on duty to cooperate at this stage. Firstly, can I refer you to, there's an opinion from Sasha White, Queen's Counsel, in the evidence. It's document M2020. I would agree and endorse those legal submissions, Ma'am. I'll address my remarks to you, if I may, rather than saying sir and ma'am the whole time. I mean no disrespect, obviously. So, Ma'am, that's a useful reference because that sets out helpfully the relevant legal principles, and I've not seen any robust analysis to the contrary. Ma'am, the issue is, under matter 2, whether the authority has complied with the duty to cooperate. And as Mr. Palmer has identified, there is no serious contention to the contrary. In fact, certainly as expressed through the statements of common ground, there seems to be a degree of unanimity, certainly amongst the order-making authorities. So, Ma'am, if I can just refer you, I apologise for doing it again, to refer you back to the statutory test in the 2004 Act, but it provides some clarity as to the decisions that need to be taken. Section 20, subparagraph 5C, tells us that the purpose of this examination is to determine whether the authority has complied with any duty imposed under Section 33A, and Section 27B(2), as you very well know, asks you to consider whether it would be reasonable to conclude that we have complied with the duty to cooperate. And if one looks at the detail in Section 33A, without giving you all of the subparagraphs, there is a legal requirement on the authority to cooperate in maximising the effectiveness with which plans are prepared, and in particular, under subparagraph 2, to engage constructively, actively, and on an ongoing basis. So the legal requirement is to engage. And Section 33A(7), in determining that, requires us to look at the guidance set out in the framework and the PPG. And Ma'am, I don't know whether you need any further assistance from the cases, but this has been looked at on a number of occasions, not least by Mr. Justice Sales in the Zurich Assurance case and Mr. Justice Dove recently in the Sevenoaks case of last year. And what they decide is that the key question under the legal duty is whether the authority has undertaken a constructive, active, and ongoing process of cooperation. And plainly, I highlight that because I don't understand anyone to be seriously challenging that proposition. And the key issue is deciding what ought to be done to maximize effectiveness. So how do you maximize that effectiveness? And what measures of constructive engagement should be undertaken? The courts have held requires an evaluative judgment by the authority, a subjective planning judgment. And the courts give the local authorities a substantial margin of appreciation or discretion. So what does that mean? It means that it is for the strategic policy-making authorities to decide amongst themselves as to what measures should be taken to maximize such effectiveness. And they have done that, as you have heard, through the technical officers group the product of which is currently PS3. So, ma'am, there is express compliance with the legal requirements under section 33. And what the framework then tells us, ma'am, at paragraphs 24 to 27, and if we just alight on paragraph 25, we're told that it's the authorities themselves who should collaborate to identify the relevant strategic matters. And that is, again, a matter of evaluative judgment for the authorities. So, ma'am, respectfully, it doesn't matter if other people around this room have different evaluative judgments, because it's for the strategic making authorities to determine what are the relevant strategic matters which should be addressed. And paragraph 26 says that it is an agreed form of joint working which should determine whether development needs from elsewhere can be met. So, ma'am, it is the process of joint working, applying paragraph 26, which determines the level of unmet need. And that, again, is precisely what the strategic making authorities have done through the technical papers and PS3. And then paragraph 27 tells us that a local authority demonstrates effective and ongoing joint working through statements of common ground produced in accordance with the PPG. And again, ma'am, you have a suite of documents under matter 2, documents 17A through to G, which are those statements of common ground which have been produced in accordance with the PPG. So, ma'am, respectfully, it's clear that what this authority has done, it is unanswerable that the legal duty has been met expressly. And it's also unanswerable, respectfully, that it is sound so far as the duty to cooperate is concerned, because when you read paragraph 33 of the NPPF, which says that being effective is an aspect of soundness, when you read paragraph 33 with paragraphs 24 to 27 in a manner which renders them internally consistent, you see that the statements of common ground have resolved the level of unmet need to be met by this plan at this stage, and there is therefore compliance with the effective requirement of soundness. And so, ma'am, that is why I say in terms of number of objections, and I allude to Bart and Wilmore because perhaps they're the most comprehensive. As a matter of evaluative judgment, a different methodology that could or should perhaps have been used to determine the level of unmet housing need, or that a different level of unmet housing need should be planned for, does not in any way lead to the conclusion that there's a failure to discharge the duty to cooperate. And ma'am, that then is why it's an answer effectively to the points raised by Mr. Kimblin. We do not respectfully need an unanswerable agreed figure as to what the unmet needs may be arising out of the Black Country Plan. What we need is the strategic policy makers to have set out through statements of common ground what are the needs to be met at this stage, and that is what has happened. And I think it's at that stage, ma'am, that we then must look at, well, what does the statutory regime say as to needs which will crystallize in the future? And the answer to that, ma'am, is found in Regulation 10A of the 2012 local planning regs, which require that there is a statutory review every 5 years. But, ma'am, if one reads Reg 10A with paragraph 33 of the NPPF, which says that policies in local plans and spatial development strategies should be reviewed to assess whether they need updating at least once every 5 years and should then be updated as necessary. This is the process expressly set out to address these impacts of dynamism. So the Birmingham plan we know is at the Reg 18 stage. As that makes progress, that will be a trigger for a review of this plan. As and when Birmingham look to set out how they're going to address their local housing needs through the standard methodology, and those needs crystallize, again, that will be another trigger for the review of this plan. But again, that is the appropriate way that the statute sets out that these issues are addressed. when one applies the statutory requirements with the framework, it is clear respectfully that this plan complies with the duty to cooperate.
Is it Land at the back? Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much, Ma'am, and thank you very much to Mr. Cannock for that explanation. I think firstly, just to set our position out, we are in agreement with the council that we're not saying that the duty to cooperate hasn't been met, but that doesn't mean that there's not a discussion around soundness, which I think is where making a greater contribution or review, etc., comes from. So, just from our point of view, we're not questioning the duty to cooperate, but one point I'd just like to make on Mr. Cannock's submissions just now on the legal side of it is, I think sometimes in planning we risk going too legal on all this, and I think how do things work in practice to actually meet needs? This discussion we have very regularly. We have it at Lichfield, and we had Mr. Cannock and I had it at Lichfield with their plan, which was adopted, their Part 2 plan a few years ago. We've had it at South Staffordshire, and we had it elsewhere in the country about reviews and the statutory requirement to review a plan every 5 years. And I think the planning practice of that is an experience is that test or that legal requirement is not enough to require a council to review a plan every 5 years, because if it did, every plan would be reviewed 5 years. And I think if we look probably just in planning resource every week, which lists which plans are being adopted and which not, you'll see a very long list of those not being reviewed every 5 years. I think if you have a geographic complex matter, which we've got here, which does require a plan to be reviewed every 5 years, as the council have made the case for, then as a minimum, I think having a review mechanism written into a plan is necessary. And that, as I've referred to Lichfield there, I referred to South Staffordshire, and obviously we're all referring to them as making contributions to the shortfall. So it's clearly working. Their review mechanisms, which forms a policy in the plan. I think that's something that goes beyond the legal test and actually is something that fundamentally goes to what makes a plan work and how you deal with geographical matters. And perhaps that's a discussion for next week on matter 3 when the other authorities are here and we can talk about the shortfall, etc. But I think it's something beyond the legal side of it, perhaps a review mechanism in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any? Oh, sorry, yeah.
Just very briefly, just to take Mr. Cannock's submissions, I think to the logical conclusion, where everyone is agreed, which is there's a clear difference between compliance with the duty to cooperate and the question of whether the plan is sound. And one can obviously tick the box in terms of duty to cooperate, but in short, come up with the wrong answer. And that's what I think a lot of the parties here are saying, which is, yes, all right, you've discussed actively, but in terms of the numbers of houses that you have, the council have decided to provide in this plan, in relation to Birmingham in particular, it's the wrong answer. And that really is a matter 3 debate rather than this a matter 2 debate.
Thank you. Are there any other points from a duty to cooperate perspective that anyone wanted to raise on this point?
Yeah, just perhaps I can just come back to Mr. Cannock. I think you took us through very helpfully the policy and the legal background in terms of the duty to cooperate, and I fully understand the position. I think what we've realised from the session this morning is that there's perhaps a reluctance from participants to get too much into the evidence in relation to housing need. We weren't quite sure how that was going to play out this morning, so I think we're probably heading for a much shorter session than we originally anticipated, which is no bad thing, but we'll give opportunity to do that. I just wanted to come back to Mr. Cannock. I mean, clearly the compliance or not with the duty to cooperate is a matter that we as inspectors will need to reach judgment on. And it is, as you know from examples elsewhere, it is very much a judgment that we'll need to make. So it's not necessarily the case because other local authorities, for example, have I suppose, confirmed their position or clarified their position in terms of the duty to cooperate. We still need to make judgments in those respects. In terms of the issues relating to housing requirements, unmet needs, etc., that forms. I think there's a consensus really that clearly forms a strategic matter that this plan and the council have to deal with in terms of duty to cooperate. Your view is that you've dealt with it, the duty to cooperate has been complied with, etc., etc. But there are strategic matters, and I think again, it's difficult to distinguish in terms of the issues between soundness and duty to cooperate. But the issue of housing requirements, unmet needs, is a strategic matter. It needs to have been addressed effectively through cooperation. As I said, I sense the mood of participants that we're probably heading for a more in-depth discussion of those issues and that evidence in terms of matter 3, which I think is fine. We'll deal with that, but I didn't want to kind of leave today's session without giving the opportunity to, if necessary, to go into that. Perhaps just to move that forward in terms of the position of other authorities. We're conscious of the statements of common ground. We're conscious of the hearing statements submitted by the authorities, which, as you say, I suppose draw a conclusion there that from the other authorities' point of view, there isn't a failure of the duty to cooperate. But it's fair to say there are still strong concerns, very strong concerns in relation to soundness issues in terms of unmet needs. So it is a concern there. So I think just to make that note really that clearly there are concerns from other authorities about what this local plan does as far as unmet needs are concerned. It's not an issue that's gone away, and we'll, I'm sure, be discussing that in depth next week. Okay, thank you. I'm not sure there was a question in there. It was perhaps me just making a
Well, yeah, thank you. So it's one of those terrifying moments, isn't it, where an inspector is going to unpick your legal submissions. Respectfully, sir, I didn't detect a question. I may just endorse what you say about ultimately, yes, the courts have been clear that you must exercise a judgment on whether the legal duties have been complied with. You've got my clear submissions and they're set out in writing elsewhere by Mr. White, and I've given you the document reference. If I may say so, I think everyone's shown a commendable level of self-discipline in suggesting that a lot of these issues are really for matter 3, not matter 2. I hear what you say about what people are saying in respect of matter 3. I'm not going to answer or address those at this stage. I know what you say, but we'll address those at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Mr. Carter, is it at the back?
Thank you, sir. There's just a couple of points that have arise from the points that people have made. Mr. Palmer talked about the apportionment of sites between sort of the incoming population as opposed to the locally generated need. And I just wanted to really make the point that most transactions take place through the housing market. Therefore, that includes the second-hand market as well. I mean, this idea of apportioning, the need on particular locations doesn't seem to add up in my mind. The next point really was, it's interesting to hear about PS4 coming up in maybe a few weeks' time, but it sounds like that's another monitoring report. It's not actually the mechanism to deal with the shortfall. So it's still this judgment call that would seem to need to be made. And finally, really, it seems to me that this whole question boils down to what is the purpose of preparing a development plan. It seems to me that the idea is about being proactive and looking over the horizon in looking how to accommodate growth and change rather than being reactive. And I think that in this plan, we've been sort of driven by being reactive rather than this sort of more proactive viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. So if nobody has any other points to raise under item B, if we just briefly move on to item C. We've read the Regulation 19 statements and obviously seen the statements of common ground, but can the council just summarise, confirm what you consider the position to be of the neighbouring authorities and how that position has changed over time, please, and the reasons for that?
Thank you, Mum. All other authorities in the HMA support position statement 3. Those that made reps on this matter at Regulation 19 stage agree that the duty, the legal duty to cooperate has been complied with, and that any matters are a matter of soundness. The submitted statements of common ground that were submitted alongside the plan also confirm that point. At the time of submission of the plan, we focused on those authorities that had made representations at the Regulation 19 stage. So those included either signed or agreed versions, and that was with Birmingham, Black Country, the 4 Black Country authorities, and North Warwickshire. They were signed versions at that time. Submitted alongside the plan were Lichfields and South Staffordshire's, which were agreed but not yet signed, but those have now been signed. Then there were drafts submitted alongside the submission plan, and those in relation to Bromsgrove, Cannock Chase and Redditch have moved to being agreed rather than just draft, and they're waiting for their authority's member endorsement, which leaves 2 of Stratford and Tamworth and Avon, which were submitted as draft versions. But as I say, it was the 8 authorities that made representations at the Regulation 19 stage that we focused on with the to secure the duty to cooperate statements.
Does anybody have any points they want to raise under item C? Okay, thank you. Perhaps if we take a break now then, and come back at 10 minutes past 11, please.
Okay, thank you. We'll resume at this point. Good. Okay, we'll move on then to item 2 on the agenda, which looks at duty to cooperate issues relating to economic growth and employment land provision. So again, I'll just turn to the council first of all, just to set the scene, I suppose. The first question really relates to the issue of any unmet need from other authorities. Particular example there, the Black Country authorities. So the council's perspective on that question first of all.
Thank you, sir. In terms of other authorities, it is only the Black Country that have asked for assistance in dealing with their local employment needs. No other authorities have asked Solihull for any assistance in doing so. We believe that the sites UK1 and UK2 that are coming forward for employment uses are strategic sites, but they will still nevertheless provide for some local opportunities. And we have, as part of the statement of common ground with the Black Country, and that can be found at paragraph 31 of document reference 017B. We will continue to engage with the Black Country authorities to determine whether and to what extent employment land in the UKC hub area can contribute towards Black Country needs, recognising that is more likely to be towards the end of the plan period and primarily part of the next plan period. So those represent these are ongoing discussions with the Black Country.
So in terms of the time scales, there's an acceptance that although it may be towards the end of the plan period we're talking about now, that there might be some issues there for this local plan to address as far as Black Country's unmet employment land needs?
Essentially so that we believe there is some scope for doing so, but that would be towards the end of the plan period.
But as it stands, the submitted local plan doesn't make any specific reference to that. It doesn't make any specific allowance for that to be provided for.
It's nothing specific in this plan, but again, bearing in mind the nature of that supply when it becomes available, it's something that can be made explicit in the next iteration of the plan.
So it's not something that you consider, I suppose it is necessarily within the scope of this examination. The prospect of a review of this local plan would take account of that, because the unmet need would be towards the later period. And there hasn't been any specific requests from the Black Country authorities or any other authority to accommodate any of their unmet need. There's clearly been an issue raised and there's been some discussion about it, but there hasn't been to date a direct request for this local plan to make specific provision.
I'd have to probably revisit the exact terms of the representations of the Black Country to determine that. I think they had hoped that some part of this plan could accommodate that, but they recognised through the statements of common ground that if there is any part to play from the strategic sites, it would be towards the end of the plan period and primarily part of the next plan period.
Okay. I suppose the broader issue, moving on to the next point, the broader issue of the overall scale of employment, land provision, jobs growth proposed. I suppose the first question really is what cross-boundary issues does that raise? I suppose the context for that is that taking the local plan, the submitted local plan, there is significant provision for employment growth at UK1 and UK2 sites in particular, and that that goes significantly beyond what the council regards is a local need. So your take really in terms of the implications of that the scale of employment growth proposed, what issues does that raise in a cross-boundary sense?
It's as you've identified, it is beyond our own local derived need, and we are looking to capitalise on the opportunity of the arrival of HS2 to provide that. At the moment, through the work that's been done for the Hedna, that's looked at existing commuter patterns in the area, and that's paragraphs 6.30 to 6.36 of the Hedna document reference 203, and the table on page 89 of that indicates that even at present, just over 25% of the workforce in the UKC hub area live in Solihull, and the expectation is that as the hub proposals develop further, it is looking to be one of the more sort of connected places in the borough. So we see as the sort of that potential for that to shift. I don't know if my sort of colleague who's any more work on that or not, in terms of the prism modelling, etc. It's picked up that.
Yes, thank you. Walter Bailey from the Council's Transport Planning Team. So as Gary references, the Hedna sets out the current commuter pattern associated with growth in the, or associated with jobs and employment within the UKC hub area. It's clear that it currently pulls in trip generation and travel demand from beyond the Solihull borough boundary, a lot from Birmingham, but also from neighbouring Shire authorities. So the approach we've taken through through building the transport evidence base is to make use of the West Midlands PRISM strategic transport model, and effectively that's a multimodal variable demand model that picks up trip generation across the region as a whole, but also nationally. So through that piece of work, we've looked to identify specifically what cross-boundary issues there are presented by the growth in that area and to mitigate accordingly.
Thank you. Okay. In term again, this may well be a matter. I'm sure it will be a matter we'll come back to when we're discussing matter 3. But I suppose of interest in relation to what the cross-boundary issues are is the relationship between the scale of employment growth proposed and the scale of housing growth proposed, and issues about whether there's a balance or a mismatch between those. What's the council's position on that? I mean, in terms of the scale of employment growth, you made reference to the opportunity that exists there. So, as I understand it, the scale of employment growth proposed in the local plan is not based on an assessment of how much employment land is needed in that sense. It's an opportunity driven situation. Just your views in terms of the relationship between that and the scale of housing therefore proposed.
That's something that was addressed in the Hedna and did result in an increase to our local housing needs figure to accommodate some of that, and that's something that the consultants that worked on the Hedna for us are being made available to go through that in detail under matter 3.
Okay, thank you. Any points from around the room? I suppose the general issue about the scale of employment land provision. Yeah. Is it Mr. Lever? Yeah.
It is. Good morning, sir. Yes, Peter Lever, JLL, and we're acting for St Modwyn Developments. We have a point about cross-boundary issues relating to the overall scale of employment, but it's also about actually the type of employment. And my particular interest is strategic logistics. And it is our submission that there is a clear need for large-scale logistics in Solihull and the wider M42 corridor. However, no serious attempt has been made by the council and relevant local planning authorities to collaborate and address this issue. And in our mind, that is a failure of the duty to cooperate. If I can just elaborate on some of those points. The plan makes no allowance for this sector. The issue has not been addressed by either the plan or the primary evidence, which is the HEDNA. This is despite specific and relevant advice contained in the PPG, recommendations made by the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study of 2015, further recommendations made in the Part 2 West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study of 2021, and strong market signals. The PPG, paragraph 2A, 31, advises that local planning authorities should collaborate with other local planning authorities to identify the scale of logistics need across relevant market areas and consider the most appropriate locations for meeting these identified needs. This has not happened. The West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study of 2015, which was commissioned by the West Midlands Local Authority Chief Executives, identifies Solihull as part of Area A, which is the M42 corridor, with this an area of high demand for logistics with supply severely short. This is back in 2015. The study recommended that local studies be commissioned to identify specific opportunities and assess policy implications. Despite this recommendation, no such local study has been commissioned by the local authority. The successor study to the 2015 study, the Part 2 West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, was published in May of this year, although it was commissioned about 2-3 years ago, and the Birmingham and Solihull LEP was a commissioning party. This study concluded that there is a limited supply of available sites with an urgent need for additional sites to be brought forward. The M42 corridor was identified as a key location with the lowest level of supply of existing sites. It made reference to a supply of 0.71 years. The market for large-scale logistics is imbalanced, with demand outstripping supply. And that isn't a recent phenomenon. It is very well documented the effect of the COVID pandemic on e-commerce, with e-commerce going from basically 20% to 30% of all retail expenditure. The structural changes in logistics go back beyond that to the last 5 or 6 years. The recent phenomenon is just escalated and accelerated the process. This imbalance has been demonstrated by strong market signals. These are referenced actually in the HEDNA. These include increased rents, reduced yields, and significantly higher land values in the M42 corridor. Thank you.
Can I just ask the council to respond to that particular point raised there in terms of the evidence relating to demand and supply for logistics purposes?
Thank you, sir. The HEDNA at paragraph 12.58 does note the likely emergence of the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, and that has now, as the gentleman's just said, been published. I think it was published in the same month the plan was submitted. A copy of that study, I think, has now been submitted to the examination library as SMBC 009. I think the study was commissioned, or the effective way of commissioning it was through 3 of the local enterprise partnerships coming together to do so, and that will be with the support of the local authorities that sit on those local enterprise partnerships. So although it wasn't a direct commission by all the local authorities within the area, it is part of the structure of regional groups, including the LEPs. So as part of that, it, in the council's view, can be seen as collaborative working to get an understanding of the nature and extent of what may be required. The study that was published in May of this year does recognise that taking taking past take-up rates, there is a demand for such space, but the study does conclude with further work is required before some of that can be crystallised. The report, paragraph 8.2, said it does not seek to predict future needs, and on page 81 of the report, it sets out some of the next steps that it believes are required, and that includes calculating a shortfall through an economic metric forecast, looking at a greenbelt review, formulating some detailed assessment criteria, potential call for sites, and importantly, some consultation with National Highways in that regard. So whilst the 2021 report does provide a useful update, in the council's opinion, there's still further work to be done, especially to quantify demand.
So I suppose in a similar vein to potential future unmet housing needs, the council's position is that things may be emerging, but there's no no definitive view about what the need is and what Solihull may or may not be looking to contribute towards that need.
Yes, and if I may add, in that context, we believe the scope of the HEDNA that we had produced, it would be beyond its scope, bearing in mind the knowledge about the earlier report that reported in 2015 and the commission that we were aware of through our participation in the local enterprise partnership, resulting in the report that published in May.
Mr. Lever, is there anything you wish to come back on there?
Yeah, just one point. Thank you. I understand the point about the second West Midlands Strategic Employment Study, that it only came out in May 2021. But I think the first study, which came out in 2015, has just been ignored, and its findings. And the recommendations of that study were very, very clear. It identified a need, it identified a very short supply, and it recommended a number of steps. And one of those steps was the commissioning of local studies. That clearly has not happened. And I'd be interested from the council why that has not happened.
Okay, and the council just respond to that particular point.
I think that it's the council was looking to see what was coming out of the report that was published in May, and that forms, in the sort of context of the discussion we're having today, through the LEPs, it was meaningful and ongoing discussion about the issue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, sir. I just thought it was worth noting, because the agenda talks about implications for commuting patterns in relation to the growth. And of course, HS2 is going to add more and faster rail capacity to London and the South East. And I think it will sort of have the effect of making commuting into London faster from Solihull than it is from Croydon, for instance. So that means that housing that's close to the station is going to be particularly attractive from that perspective. It seems to me that that's simply going to add to the growth pressures that we've been talking about earlier. And I'm not really sure if that's included in any of the documentation that I've seen.
Thank you. If we could move on then to any specific cross-boundary issues relating to UK Central Hub and specifically sites UK1 and UK2. I suppose the council's view really in terms of what if any cross-boundary issues do exist with those, particularly those two site allocations, and how they've been addressed through cooperation.
The main one to consider in that context, sir, is the relationship to North Warwickshire District Council, and therefore, as part of the statement of common ground that has been developed and signed with North Warwickshire District Council, and that would be document reference 017G under item 3.9, that recognises that both authorities recognise the potential to improve and create local transport connectivity to access employment and economic opportunities, and that we'll work together with relevant national, county, highways authorities, agencies and adjoining local authorities to help realise those opportunities and improvements. And those are expected to come forward during the lifetime of the plan as the hub area is taken forward.
And again, no specific issues of concern were raised from other authorities in terms of the implications of the allocations, UK1 and UK2, in the sense of the interrelationship between employment, land provision elsewhere. It was, as far as the duty to cooperate is concerned, there were some, as you say, you've alluded to there, some issues relating particularly to transport matters raised, but not in terms of the scale of the development proposed there and the implications for jobs growth elsewhere, etc.
That's right. So none.
Okay, just to bring this particular section of the agenda on economic growth to a conclusion, just I suppose pulling all that together, the position. Sorry, Mr. Levy. Yeah.
Sorry, just one final point. I think earlier in this piece, there was reference to UK1 and UK2, that it helped meet wider needs beyond the local employment. And I think clarification on that from the council would be helpful. But my understanding for what it is worth is that UK1 is principally to meet wider needs rather than local needs, and expressly is for research and development and advanced manufacturing. So none of that land will be available for strategic logistics. Secondly, with UK2, our understanding is that the potential for UK2 to accommodate strategic logistics is limited, and it's limited for two specific reasons. One is that JLR have made a strong claim that they want some of that land for their own expansion, and that's come through one of the position statements of one of the other developers. And secondly, that UK2 is also, the justification to policy P3 also refers to UK2 meeting the needs of any expansion of facilities for Birmingham Airport. So essentially the point I'm coming to is that there is a, in terms of strategic logistics, there is a real limit or lack of sites that can accommodate this sector if you consider that there is an unmet need for that sector. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, perhaps we've covered it, but just to, I suppose, sum up the position of other authorities in relation to employment land from the council's perspective, in terms of the duty to cooperate. There is, although it's fair to say issues were raised and discussions have clearly taken place, the formal position of other authorities, there's no failure of the duty to cooperate in that sense. And I suppose where we're at with it is that ongoing discussions will take place, but we're looking at probably a review of this plan to accommodate any particular needs that arise.
That's great, sir.
Okay, before we move on to item 3, any final points anyone wishes to make about duty to cooperate in relation to economic growth, employment land provision matters? Okay, good. Yeah, probably relatively briefly we can conclude then. In terms of any other site allocations and potential cross-boundary issues and duty to cooperate issues, perhaps the council could just outline any things that were raised as far as representations are concerned and how they've been resolved in your view for any other site allocations in the plan.
Thank you, sir. In relation to that matter, it's really our engagement that we've had with Bromsgrove District Council and Worcestershire County Council in relation to the Blythe allocations, in particular BL1, and those have crystallised in terms of the statements of common ground, and there is the updated one for Bromsgrove, which has been submitted as document reference SG 001, and in particular I'd point to paragraphs 11 to 15 and 17 to 18, and similar issues covered by the Highways Authority in that area, and that was the Worcestershire County Council, and under Statements of Common Ground 017M, that's paragraphs 15 to 17 and 19 to 22. And those effectively are in relation to transport matters around that site coming forward, potential for other highway improvements in that area, and a safe pedestrian access to the station. We believe they're relatively small amendments, probably could be considered as main modifications, but small amendments, and we're discussing with both Bromsgrove and Worcestershire what those would be in terms of those small additions to a policy BL1.
And they weren't raised in relation to duty to cooperate concerns. They were more detailed soundness comments raised through representation.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Ventham?
Thank you, sir. Catherine Ventham on behalf of Barrett David Wilson, IM Land. It's just a point of clarification, sir, in respect of the status of the statements of common ground with Bromsgrove, because I think one of my clients has just done a check on the website and they seem to be suggesting that the version that's on the website is still a draft one. And And at the same time, Bromsgrove's, in fact, I've just been told the version on the website doesn't look like it's been signed. And the Bromsgrove's website states that they're deciding on this matter on the 20th of October at Cabinet and then full council on the 3rd of November. So I think I'd just like to understand, is that a signed and agreed statement of common ground? Because what's being said by the council is potentially slightly different to what's on the website and what Bromsgrove's website is saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps the council could just clarify that situation.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the version submitted alongside the plan was a draft version. The version SG001 that has recently been admitted to the examination library is what we would call an agreed but as yet unsigned version of the statement of common ground with Bromsgrove. And I think the note that was submitted with those documents, I think said it was now agreed that Officer 11 was waiting member endorsement.
Just the dates you referred to, can you just get, in terms of the council receiving a report on?
Yeah, so Bromsgrove District Council's website says it's going to Cabinet on the 20th of October and then full council on the 3rd of November. And that that's just confirmed that the version that's on the website isn't signed, but that would make sense if it hasn't yet been endorsed by members.
Okay, I suppose just as an action point, that one of them that we'll pick up, just if the council could, given that the hearings for the examination are stretching into December at this stage at least anyway, if you could keep an eye on that, and if there is an update in terms of that statement being signed off, that would be useful for that to be passed through to us. Yeah, thank you. Finally then, just picking up any other strategic matters, the two matters that spring to mind in terms of the background are transport and minerals. So perhaps the council can just outline how you've addressed those matters in terms of cooperation, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with picking up the transport. So we've worked closely with neighbouring highway authorities and transport authorities in an iterative and incremental manner throughout development of the plan, from stages of looking at broad distribution strategy across to full detailed transport assessment. That includes the likes of Transport for West Midlands, National Highways, Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Coventry councils, and then obviously planning authorities like Bromsgrove and North Warwickshire. I don't believe we've received a response from any party that suggests that we haven't met the duty to cooperate, nor that the approach taken in developing evidence base it has issues. There are matters that need refinement that various parties have raised, but I think they'll be picked up in subsequent sessions.
So if I could just pick up on the minerals issue that you've raised, the council is a member of the West Midlands Aggregates Working Party, and due to cooperate discussions take place within the context of that group, which meets on a regular basis. There are no indications that or no representation suggesting that any other authority is unhappy with the approach taken by the council as far as mineral matters are concerned. I think there is one statement that has been submitted by Mr. Freeman, who isn't here this morning, and probably we can pick up that detail at the discussion in relation to policy P13.
Okay, thank you. Good. Anything else the council wishes to add? You probably don't, but anyway, anything else you wish to add in relation to the duty to cooperate? Any other matters that we haven't discussed so far? Okay. Just before I bring things to a close, then any other points anyone else in the room wishes to make in relation to the duty to cooperate? Okay, a surprisingly short session, which is always a good thing, I think. Thank you. I mean, as we've heard earlier, I mean, clearly a lot of the discussion has been parked for matter 3 in relation to housing requirements, unmet need, etc., in terms of soundness. So we do have 2 days set aside next week to go through that information in depth. So yes, thank you all very much, and again appreciate the willingness to move things on for next week, really. So that's helped us. So good luck in all of you searching for petrol stations that are open. If you find one, please let me know and I'll be able to get home. But thank you all for your participation today. Thank you.